The thought that children are sometimes horrifically abused by the very people who are meant to nurture and protect them makes most recoil in horror. But for some young people, it's the awful reality. The Australian Childhood Foundation provides trauma counselling for thousands of children across Australia who have been removed from their families for their own protection. The foundation says child protection has been neglected by successive governments for decades and needs serious investment as well as a national approach. The tragic story of a 12-year-old girl sold for sex while she was in the care of the state has caused long and loud community outrage.
This is systemic failure. Police, education and child protection were all aware that there were issues around this child and failed to act appropriately.
The case led to a no-confidence motion against the minister.
Could children still be falling through the cracks on your watch right now?
Order, sick, order.
A parliamentary inquiry's heard from parents and carers who feel let down by the system.
We've got a girl at the moment and she's been non-attending for the last 3 years we've had her. But that's because she's had lots and lots of placements. She's had
Occasionally it's going to happen that wrong decisions are made, and the reason for that is not a lack of capacity.
The head of the Australian Childhood Foundation argues there is a lack of capacity and it's been lacking for some time.
I think that the out-of-home care system in Tasmania has been neglected for decades, not just this government, the previous one, we're talking decades. And unless there's serious investment, then I think the sorts of problems and the stresses that are out there in Tasmania will continue.
While the debate rages over who to blame, the Australian Childhood Foundation has been focusing on children who've been abused or neglected. 12 months ago it began trialling a trauma service for them.
Oh, the need's huge. I think we only deal with probably less than 30% of the population of kids that we could deal with. Kids in out-of-home care, children who are removed from their own families for their own protection and then placed in foster care or in residential care, should all have access to a trauma service, or should all have access to specialist counselling in order to help them recover from the effects of abuse.
The foundation has been running child trauma services in other states for 20 years. To test the demand, last year the state government agreed to partly fund it in Tasmania.
The state government puts in $500,000 a year. The foundation puts in about $100,000 to $150,000 a year. I would expect that in order for us to address the need that's out there, you would need to triple that.
Mr Tucci says they are currently working with about 70 children, but estimates there's 3 times that number that need it. Foster carer Ruth told Stateline how the trauma service helped her foster son. We're not able to identify her or the young boy.
We have a child who's been with us for 15 months and wakes every night several times in the night and calls out to make sure that we're still there.
The boy, who is now 8 years old, suffered from drug abuse in utero and physical abuse as a young baby, then neglect.
He was hit and abused, and so were the other members of his family, including his mother. She rescued them from that environment, but it has a big effect on parenting because the mother has been through it as well, and her ability to meet her child's needs is impaired.
As a teacher at the boys' school, Ruth knew a little bit about him, and after discussing it with her husband and 2 older children, applied to become his foster parents.
He was taken away at 6. He was very anxious. He had very poor language skills. Educationally, he was well behind, probably 2 years behind where he should have been.
The boy was incontinent, undernourished and couldn't use a knife and fork, having only eaten with his hands.
He hadn't been to a birthday party ever. He hadn't been to the beach. So all that experience he'd never had. So things that you would normally expect a child to have had, he really hadn't experienced anything like that.
Instead of physically lashing out, the boy would get anxious and internalise.
rocking and banging his head against the wall, those sort of behaviours that are sort of self-pacifying behaviours that he doesn't, that we've had to teach him not to do, and teach him you come for a cuddle when you hurt yourself.
For the past year, he's had intensive counselling with a psychologist at the foundation.
And she works with us, with our child, a foster child, and with his family. So she's the central person that deals with all of us, which is, I think, the real key. I think that's been the big success for us, is having this one person who knows the whole picture.
It's not cheap, but I think that it costs far less than the long-term consequence of untreated trauma. I mean, you see the consequences of untreated trauma in adults today. That there are problems with mental health, problems with depression, problems with crime, where the research has provided a direct link back to abuse in childhood.
Joe Tucci cites research by Access Economics, which found that in 2007 child abuse cost Australia between $10 and $30 billion. In Tasmania, at least $600 million. To provide therapeutic trauma services is a fraction of that, which he says ultimately saves the community money. Ruth's foster boy is coming ahead in leaps and bounds.
Academically, there's been huge progress. He's reached the benchmarks now for his age, so he's where he should be. It's still tentative and it needs reinforcement, but he's definitely there. And his speech and language has improved to the point where he's now age appropriate as well.
Ruth says she learned that a common side effect of trauma is an inability to concentrate and hypervigilance, both traits displayed by her foster.
You'd send him to do something with 2 instructions, go and get your dressing gown and your towel, and he'd get out the door and come back and say, what do I have to get? That was right at the beginning, and you'd give him 1 instruction and he'd still come back because he couldn't hold all that information in his working memory while he was so traumatised. But now, we realised just recently, we gave him 5 things to get and he pulled it all off.
The little boy is now in the process of being reunited with his family.
He's starting to talk about going home, whereas before he would say, I want to stay with you forever and ever. But he's really enjoying going home now, and things are really different there for him.
But he'll stay under the care of the department and his counsellor. The foundation has made a submission to Tasmania's parliamentary inquiry.
Well, our submission talks about the need for legislative reform. The Act that governs child protection in Tasmania, I think, should be updated and provide a lot more rigour to the decision-making of the department.
He says the community also has a role to play, not just to react with outrage when a case hits the headlines.
Well, we've done some research over the last 10 years, really, where we've asked the community to rate what they think are the most important problems facing their community. And child abuse, unfortunately, consistently rates at the bottom of the list. It rates lower than problems with roads and footpaths, problems with the price of petrol going up, with council rates.
Although he concedes it's a natural reaction for people to distance themselves from such a confronting issue.
We can't really register that children are being sexually abused by stepdads and dads and sometimes by mums. We can't really register that there are parents out there who come home drunk and engage in violence towards the other parent in the household, and that the kids are seeing that on a daily basis. That's the kind of abuse and violence, that's the kind of environment that there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of kids in Tasmania tonight who will be going home to face that.
Ultimately, he says, the federal government should take the lead with a national approach.
We've got a anti-drug strategy, we've got a mental health strategy, we've got a homelessness strategy, but we don't have a child abuse prevention strategy. And it's 20 years since we had one, and I think that it's incumbent on the federal government to lead this process. It's got, it's trying to come up with a national framework for child protection, but it's not enough. And I think the federal government has abdicated all responsibility, like all previous federal governments have, in the area of child protection, and not even seen it as an area that it needs to support the states in funding and investing in.